Good evening, everybody. Please take your seats. Welcome. This is the County Executive Leadership Series, and we are really lucky tonight. One of the things that we're blessed to have in Orange County is West Point. West Point calls Orange County home, and we are so proud to have the #1 school in America here. And what that does for us is it gets us access to some of the best leaders that there are in the world. I mean, they're world-renowned. People from all over the globe come over here to learn and listen, and of course, educating our future Army soldiers. So today we're lucky. I have the Dean of Academics for West Point. This is the top guy, General Shane Reeves. So come on out, General.
Yeah. Thank you.
So proud to have you, sir. Please have a seat. So, General, say hello.
Hello, everybody. It's great. I see some friends out there. Everybody's my friend. Everybody's my friend, but I have some people I personally know sitting out there. So it's nice to see all of you.
So you have a big reputation because a lot of people that when I posted your picture and your description that you're coming here and you're doing this podcast with me, people said he is a funny general and a funny attorney. Uh-oh. And I have some of the people in the audience are attorneys. One of my county attorney, I told him today, I said, this is going to be like a unicorn, an attorney that's actually funny. And he said, well, Steve, when we hang out by ourselves as lawyers, we think we're funny. I said, you think you're funny, but I hear great stuff about you, sir.
Wait, where are the lawyers? Anybody? Okay, here's the deal. I'm not really a good lawyer anymore. Like, I tell people all the time, like, if you need to buy a house, I don't know, buy a car, do something real with your life, don't come to me. Like, my mom will ask me legal questions. I'm like, I don't know, Mom. You want to start a war or stop a war? That's pretty much all I got. That's all I can pretty much do. But yeah, so I'm originally from the state of Wyoming. Watch this. Anyone from the state of Wyoming? This is exactly the answer I'd expect. That's the answer I always get. So I'm originally from the state of Wyoming, and though I thought about it when I was coming over here, I actually, between my time at West Point and teaching at West Point, have lived in Orange County longer than I lived in Wyoming now.
Wow.
Which is, I love this county, I love this area.
Wow, now I can say you're from Orange County.
I can, yeah.
Marty Dempsey used to say that once in a while to me. He goes, I'll be the highest ranking guy that could ever vote for you.
So I grew up in Wyoming, and Wyoming's population is about 500,000 people, and I have this great story. I was walking into the mess hall a little while ago, and there was a formal dinner, and as I was walking in, I saw this woman, and she was lost. And so I walk up to her, you just make conversation, I'm like, hey ma'am, how are you? Great. I'm like, okay, you looking for the dinner in the mess hall? She goes, I am. I said, all right, I'll show you where it's at. And so as we're walking, I said, so where are you from? She goes, oh, I'm from Manhattan. I'm like, oh. She goes, where are you from? I'm like, you're not gonna get it. I'm from really far away. And she goes, oh, are you from New Jersey? I'm like, no, no. It's pretty close. And then my other great Wyoming, I have 1,000 Wyoming stories. But when I came back to West Point to teach, I had this opportunity to work in the admissions office, to work on the admissions committee, which is where you review files for cadets, cadet candidates who want to come to West Point. And so you go to this training because you're looking at all this, all these personal files. And as I'm sitting there, this captain comes in. He's like, all right, okay, you're here for the training for admissions. I'm like, yeah. He's like, okay, how many of you went here? And I raised my hand. I'm like, I went to West Point. He's like, what year did you graduate? I said, 1996. He's like, all right, it's gotten really hard to get in here since there. I'm like, yeah, I'm sure. Because I mean, like, these kids like cure cancer, they build homes for the homeless, they have perfect SATs. I'm like, awesome. He goes, I mean, it is hard to get in here unless you're from like Wyoming or something. And I'm like, that's me. I'm the quota fill from Wyoming. He's like, are you really from Wyoming? I'm like, yeah. He's like, no, sorry, I meant South Dakota. I'm like, too late. It's too late. But the reason I decided to go to West Point is I have a pretty long family history of family that have gone to West Point. So my great-grandfather graduated in 1892, and then I had multiple great-uncles in the 20s, and my grandfather and his brother in 37 and 39, my brother and my sister-in-law.
Wow.
My son just graduated. So we have a long family history at West Point. So it feels a little bit like it's the family school.
I didn't see them in the bio. Did they fight for the South or something?
Yeah, no, they didn't fight for the South. I cut them out of the bio because.
Okay, yeah. That's a lot. Wow, that's wonderful.
It is, yeah. And then after West Point, this is one of the best parts about the Army. You can do lots of different things. So I came out of West Point. I was an armor officer, so I was able to drive tanks, and then the Army has a program where they will, if you apply and you're selected, you can go to law school. And so I applied and went to law school and became a JAG officer, and then had a chance to come back and teach at West Point, and then I've been there for a while teaching and running administration.
I mean, when I looked at your bio and I saw, and you have incredible, I mean, you've been published, we're going to talk about all sorts of stuff, but armor officer, if there's anything that any man or any kid or anybody that plays Army as a kid, the ultimate thing is to play with tanks.
Yeah.
And you got to do that from 96 to after 9/11?
Right before I went to law school,
yeah.
So right till about 2000. I think, if you remember, and I'm looking around, most of you will remember, the branches in the Army popularity goes up and down based on popular culture and what's going on. I came in the Army right after the Persian Gulf War. And everybody remembers M1s jumping over ditches and flying, and there's like a guy with a Cav hat on. I'm like, I want to do that. Right?
Yeah.
The kids today, they want to do cyber. They want to get into artificial intelligence, autonomy. If you come to West Point and you walk around, you're going to see all this construction, and probably the cornerstone of the construction is a 136,000 square foot, $250 million building that's called the Cyber Engineering Academic Center, which is very much focused on emerging technology, whether it's autonomy, AI, UAVs, other things.
So you, if you look at your career, you've been doing legal work and then academics, and 10 years you taught there. What, if you looked at it, like what was the most exciting time? Before you did that? Are you exciting now?
I mean, it's always exciting. I mean, it's going to take me a minute. I think to help contextualize some of the things we're going to talk about, let me just lay out, I think, how dangerous the environment we live in is right now and why that is important. So when you say exciting, when you said that, I'm like, we're in a really exciting time right now, but it's exciting can also mean unstable. So if you look around the world, and I know you said you had the previous leadership series speakers spoke on Ukraine, so I won't spend a lot of time, but if you think geopolitically, and you look across the globe, there feels like there's a great unraveling perhaps taking place internationally. Ukraine is a great example, right? There's a few statistics. It's hard to fathom the size of that conflict, that there is somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million casualties in Europe. The Russians have fired 6 million artillery rounds. The Ukrainians have fired 2 million in response. There's 10,000 drones that go down a month in Ukraine. Every square kilometer of contested space, there's between 300 to 400 autonomous drones flying at any one time. And it has a feel of a World War I type conflict, except that there's such an emergence of technology that is changing the very nature of that conflict. Data is ubiquitous, satellites are important, GPS, unmanned aerial systems, all of those. So that's just Ukraine. But then if you look at the Middle East and you start to really see what's happening there, the Middle East is simply on fire. I mean, obviously the horrendous attacks on October 7th on the kibbutzes in southern Israel, which I've actually had a chance to go to, were cataclysmic. But if you start to look at what's happening, Israel's operations in Gaza, where they're fighting and we have history in doing this, an ideologically motivated non-state actor that is transnational, that means that threat hasn't gone away, but they're connected, right? Hamas, Hezbollah, which is in southern Lebanon, the Houthis who are in Yemen, all connected under the umbrella of a nefarious state called Iran. That's really dangerous. And that's not even talking about China, right? If you look at China, Chairman Xi, who's 70 years old, has said, hey, on my watch, we're going to make sure Taiwan is part of the CCP, and I think we should listen to him. And I think one of the things that concerns me, and I think about exciting, I also think about what makes my job so important, is there is starting to become a growing connection between these nefarious state actors, right? If you look at Iran and its connection to Russia through the providing of weapons, China is supporting the Russians in Ukraine, and really the connection to North Korea, you start to see a unraveling and maybe a reconnecting of the world in a nefarious way. That's just internationally. Domestically, I don't talk politics, I'm a military officer, but just domestically, there's some extreme challenges, right? One of the things, there's this interesting data point. If you know historians, there's a guy named Nigel Ferguson and a guy named Paul Kennedy, who's a professor at Yale, and they've written a number of books, and they've talked about when you can see a global power starting to recede. And there's one factor that once it's crossed, that's usually the sign, and it's happened since Roman times all the way up until today, and it's when a nation starts to spend more to service their debt than they do on national defense. Well, we crossed that Rubicon on March 17th of this year. We started to pay more on our national debt than on defense for the first time. That, coupled with the decline of our own industrial base, right? Like all the chips that we rely on, all these phones and everything else, they're all made in Taiwan, right? So we have this real problem with being able to be able to support ourselves and turn on the arsenal of democracy if we need to. And then you take into account that there's some demographic challenges in the United States, especially in higher education. So since 2011, there's been a decrease in college attendance by 12.3% across the United States. And that doesn't take into account what is considered a demographic cliff that is really connected to the Great Recession of 2008. There's looking to be probably another decline of college-age Americans by about 15 to 20% starting now and going forward. And one of the interesting things is the lack of young men going to college. So across the United States, the lowest percent of young men are in college in the history of the United States. So it's 41%, all colleges, it's the student population is 41%, 59% women. And so you take into these demographic challenges, you take in some of our concerns with whether it's national debt or our industrial base, and when you put all that together, combined with the geopolitical issues, this is a really challenging time, and we need leaders who can navigate through uncertainty and ambiguity, and so that's one of the things that we really focus on. But I think the biggest thing, which makes it exciting, the biggest change, and I don't know if we see it like in our day-to-day life, but we should, is the advent of artificial intelligence. This isn't a fad. This isn't just a trend. This is happening, and it's changing everything fast, like very fast. 3 years ago, ChatGPT, right? ChatGPT, you can go plug in stuff. It was rudimentary. It was kind of like if you were like a preschooler could write things. Today, artificial intelligence is evolving so quickly that it really is starting to surpass even the highest level intellect, whether it's a PhD or someone with the terminal degrees, abilities in white-collar type jobs. And that's before artificial intelligence has even been called dehobbled. Once it's dehobbled and it can start to connect to each other and start to use computers itself, well, we've moved into a new era. And there's a great book I recommend called The Age of AI by Dr. Henry Kissinger and Eric Schmidt from Google and a professor from MIT. And they talk about this. They're like, we have moved into the age of AI versus, and it's like, what does that mean? Well, I mean, we have all grown up and lived in the age of enlightenment, right? The age of enlightenment, which is basically like gain knowledge. Like go and read books. Those who are those who are wisest are the ones with access to knowledge. So think about when you're probably growing up, people would come and sell the Encyclopedia Britannica around your house, right? And you'd have those on your shelf, and that's where you'd get your information. Well, the smartest man alive 60 years ago was the person who could recite facts and would know where to get their knowledge and look at their books. Today, the 15-year-old with their cell phone has greater access to knowledge than that person ever did. And so knowledge isn't really what's valuable, it's the application of that knowledge. And so one of the things that we're really starting to see is, as you move into this age of AI, the ability of AI to access that knowledge and then start to replicate things that typically humans have only been able to do. For example, write music, paint, compose essays, those type of things. It's really changing everything. And so one of my concerns is ensuring that the young people, in particular the young officers that are coming from the academy, have figured out a way to leverage AI without having their critical thinking skills atrophy. Because that's really the concern, is that you start to rely on the technology to a point you don't even know how it works. And you can think about it yourself, like, does anyone know how to use like a slide rule? Maybe a few people, right? Do people know how to, or maybe one or two, right? Maybe there's a few people out there that know how to do long division, right? Maybe there's a few people that know how to do whatever, but watch people now. They always use GPS in their phone. In fact, they're probably like, why do these people never use this? Like, why, like who would actually pull out a map and look at these things? But there's a reliance on technology that also becomes a single point of failure for a population. And for me, from a military officer's perspective, I need to make sure our officers know how to use it, but also know what to do when it's not available. So those are the challenges, and very quickly. And if you put all that together, it makes this an extremely exciting time. Probably the most dangerous time, I would say, internationally since World War II, but I think probably the greatest evolution in what we would consider our society maybe ever.
It's you got my mind going all over the place to ask you a million different questions. I mean, you're exactly the same age as me. Graduated
You look
college.
a lot better, by the way.
You got the Eisenhower uniform though. Makes you trump me any day. I looked at your resume. You got a law degree, went to West Point, and you run academics for There's not much more you need to do on your resume. One of the things that you and I have experienced is the role of women. I have 2 daughters and 2 sons, and I think the military and society in the whole has now, the doors have so much opened for our daughters, and you have a daughter as well. I think you have 2 and 1 son. How is that as you change and evolve? I mean, I remember in the Navy, they didn't have women in submarines. It was a big deal for us. Oh my God, they're going to put them in submarines, and now they're going to be, the chief of naval operations is a female that grew up in Albany she was a rock star admiral. I think that's only made us all better.
I agree. I think that it's foolish to restrict, pragmatically, just from a pragmatic perspective. I mean, think about it, you're restricting, if you exclude women from military service or any role, well, you're restricting yourself to half the population or less. And there's a lot, that's just a foolish thing to do.
Yeah.
But women have demonstrated the propensity both to serve and the ability to serve successfully in the harshest environments. And I would also argue that, again, if you start to take into a lot of what I just said, technology is changing things so dramatically that that we're going to need everybody. When I talk about China, one of the things that when you think about China, and that many will say that is probably our greatest threat, which I would agree with this. Well, there's some things that are problematic for us, right? We have roughly 350 million people in this country, all right? China has over 1 billion, right? India just surpassed it as the most populous country, but 1.3 billion. To be able to fight and win, you have to have everybody. And that, when we say terms like inclusive, like you want to be as inclusive as possible.
Yeah.
And again, I think that you start to see that, you talk specifically about women in the military, I mean, it's not too much to say that we would fail in today's day and age without having as many people as possible serving from across the country in all backgrounds and expertise. Because I think that's what makes us better. I do think that. I think our ability to draw on our entire population. I think it also makes us better because what happens oftentimes is ideas, we have a real marketplace of ideas. Like people come from different backgrounds and different views and different perspectives, and they'll debate and discuss, and out of that will come the best ideas. And I think you don't do that if you start to exclude huge percentages of the population. And so I think this is a great evolution for our nation and for our Army.
So when you spent 10 years plus teaching at West Point, and now you're also in charge of academics. I was looking up, I went all over on different things with you, like what is the definition of dean of academics? And every college in the country has a different one. It's the one that signs the diplomas.
I'm basically the provost, is what I basically am.
Yeah.
I'm basically like in charge. Like there's at West Point, you have 13 academic departments, and they have department heads. Those are like deans of colleges, and then the provost oversees the academic program. And West Point's always called it the dean. And if there's anything West Point's good at is our tradition, so we will not change. The rest of the country will call it provost, I'm the dean.
So where I'm getting at is when you're looking at the cadet that you're looking for now, the new one, you're looking through all the applications, considering what you mentioned before now, AI being a big priority, and what is the ideal cadet coming in right now? If you're looking at an audience with some grandkids, kids, people that want to join West Point, people that are going to watch on Spotify and YouTube, what is the cadet of tomorrow, the ideal candidate for you?
I mean, I think West Point's done a pretty good job looking at holistically at young people to determine who will be successful. I mean, West Point has a model where we try to look at multiple things about a person to ensure that they're going to have the ability and the capacity to lead. So obviously, I focus on the academics, and I think it's as competitive now as it's ever been to get into West Point academically. I mean, obviously, they're going to have great standardized tests. They're going to take the hardest classes they can in high school. They like to push themselves intellectually. But that's just a component. right? That doesn't mean that we need every kid to have a perfect SAT, because we're also looking for those to have a physical foundation, so that, because being in the Army is a physical job, and there's a physical component to being a leader, and so they need to have at least a physical foundation so that they can have the presence and the ability to lead from the front. And then of course there's the character component, right? I mean, more than important than anything, everything we do is built on a foundation of character, and that character is doing the right thing when someone's not watching, and it's very much a values-laden institution. And so we're looking for someone who has the intellectual abilities and have the physicality, but they have the underlying character to do the things that will make them successful as a military officer. And of course, there has to be a propensity to serve. Like, they want to be in the military, they have to like the military, they have to like the things that come along with it. I would tell you that when I look at cadets, and I'm trying to sound like an old guy here, right? If I look at, and I'm stereotyping, and I have 3 kids. I have a 22-year-old, a 20-year-old, and a 15-year-old. And I look across, and we see cadets come in. If you would have told me 40 years ago what is the most likely thing to make a cadet have problems at the academy, oftentimes it would be probably academics, or it might be something honor-related. Today, there's definitely been a decline in the physical foundation of our young people, for whatever reason. They don't do as much physically, and they also a lot of times are single sport kids, which means that they're really good at baseball, but they don't have hand-eye coordination to do a lot of other things. And so at West Point, I mean, cadets are going to take 7 physical education courses and to do a lot of other different things. And I think the other thing I would say, one of the things that when I look for a cadet, is West Point has a kryptonite for everybody. It's intended to trip you up. It is intended to make you struggle, so you overcome adversity, and it's going to be something. It might be math, it might be the indoor obstacle course, it might be trying to lead peers, or whatever it might be. It might be time management. It's trying to ensure that the young person has the grit and the resilience to be able to get knocked down. You hear this all the time: get knocked down and get back up, and be able to continue to operate at a high level is really, really important. And so I do think that is something I worry a little bit about, is that not a lot of young kids today have not been challenged before they get to West Point.
And so are they limping along, or they have to make up that gap once they get in there?
Or they don't make it.
Okay.
I mean, this isn't meant to be harsh, but not everyone's meant to be an officer in the United States Army, right? I mean, the responsibilities are too immense, and the obligations are huge. About you have to go out and lead America's sons and daughters, and you need to be qualified to do that. And if you don't have the ability to do it, then that's okay. But that doesn't mean that you should be put in charge simply because we're going to drag you across the finish line. That's just not going to happen.
One of my friends, who's an economist, who's on a lot of major news programs on a regular basis, he says America innovates, China replicates, and Europe regulates. Does the military today allow, and does our society, are we innovating enough, America?
So broadly speaking, it's not just by chance that you're probably top 10 biggest companies in the world are headquartered in the United States, right? I mean, this is still the place where innovation happens, right? I mean, I think the United States is well poised to continue to be the leader globally in so many different ways, because there is that American can-do spirit, that entrepreneurial aspect of how we operate. And I think that we are very good at innovating across lots of different ways. Inside the Army, I think it's critical. It's critical that we are developing creative, innovative, entrepreneurial young officers. And you can't do that unless they have the intellectual foundation to be able to work in that space. And so my job is, when they walk across the stage, I need our officers to be critical thinkers who've embraced a professional identity and can employ their intellectual abilities on behalf of the nation. But I want them also to be lifelong learners who have a passion for learning and have that intellectual foundation. And I think that the United States is good at it. I think the U.S. Army is quite good at it. I mean, my example would be, Ukraine. Again, if you look at in February 2022, when the Russians continued their invasion, because they started in 2014 in Crimea, they really expected to get to Kyiv in 72 hours. Like they were like, we're going to get there. And when it didn't happen, they froze. Like we call that the fog of war. Like inevitably these things happen, and they froze. They didn't know what to do. And so that's why they started to call up these colonels and these generals, and they had massive casualties. And then that's where you've got this basically trench warfare all along the eastern Ukrainian front. Well, we're the opposite. We would look at our young officers with their great non-commissioned officers and be like, figure it out. Like, of course you're going to hit an obstacle. That's what it's all about. And I think that's where I expect the West Pointer to be at their very best, which is when they are punched in the face and then there's an obstacle to be like, yeah, that's exactly what I want. Now, hey, let's figure this out. And I say this a lot. Like, I have great faith in our ability to fight and win, because I think that when everything comes down, when all the technology comes down and things are a mess and the communications are offline and you just have one platoon versus another platoon, you know, the most of the autocratic states, their platoon leaders are going to be frozen and scared to act, and they're going to try to call higher to get an answer like, what do I do? Whereas the American officer is going to look around and be like, okay, team, let's go. Let's figure out how to solve this. But we can't do that unless they have that innovative spirit. And one of the things that drives innovation is you can't be risk adverse, right? You absolutely just cannot be risk adverse, which means you have to underwrite risk, which means you have to underwrite mistakes. And I think that that's something I think social media has made more difficult. I think that the belief that people, like right now, this is going to be on social media, right? You know, there's very little grace for mistakes. But if you're going to operate at a very high level, and I know there's a lot of other professionals in here that work in the fire departments, police officers, those things, those are risky jobs. And you want them to take risks, and that means sometimes there will be mistakes. And inside what's called the law of armed conflict, the one part of the law I actually know, right, there is a rule called the Rendulic rule. And the Rendulic rule basically says if you're a commander and you make a decision, and that decision turns out to be the wrong decision, but you made the best decision on the facts and circumstances you knew at that time, it's okay. You're going to be exonerated, right? Because we understand that warfare is dangerous. We understand it's chaotic, and you can't be perfect. But I do think there's this growing expectation in our society that everybody's going to be perfect, and everybody likes to Monday morning quarterback, and everybody likes to look at their phones and see people make mistakes. And there's a little bit of cheering on that. And I'm like, hey, just be careful, right? Because what you may do is disincentivize people to going into leadership positions. And you want the best people in leadership positions, and you want them to be willing to go out on a limb a bit. And so you want, as a society, to underwrite that. And that's where innovation comes from, is people willing to take some risks.
Is one of the things we talked about real briefly before, like, you know, Admiral Nimitz ran a ship aground as a young lieutenant. I was saying Admiral McRaven, 4-star, was fired from the commander of SEAL Team 6 early in his career. They both were able to recover. Is the climate, even like our fire chiefs and our police chiefs, is the climate existing today or is it a lot narrower to have that type of risk taker, have some type of flexibility to give a little bit of forgiveness when he or she missteps?
I think it is a little bit narrower. It's not, so many of you may have heard of right after Vietnam, there was a thing called the Hollow Army, and there was a zero defect army, is what it was oftentimes called, which is no mistakes, because it was the pendulum had swung, right? Like the Vietnam Army had so many problems that it was like, we're going to hold everyone accountable for everything, right? So the example I would give is, you and I were both in Taji, Iraq at different times. So at the end of my deployment in Iraq, a policy came out. And the policy was simply, hey, anytime someone fires a weapon, we want to have an informal investigation just to see why they fired the weapon, right? Well, what do you think soldiers are going to do? They're not going to fire weapons. They're like, I'm just going to go home, right? So maybe that's the intent. Maybe the intent is to quit making people fire weapons, right? We're trying to disincentivize that, and that might have been the right call when you think about counterinsurgency and the local population as the center of gravity and that type of operation. But there are real consequences when you either over-investigate things. There's real consequences when it doesn't feel like that leadership is supporting individuals taking risk. And you talk about a Nimitz, you talk about a McRaven, and there's probably many other examples. There's a great story about Eisenhower was court-martialed at one point, right? you know, I mean, I don't know who's running Operation Overlord if Eisenhower doesn't make it through his court-martial for some discrepancies when it came to some minor pay things in the 1920s, right? So I don't think we're in a zero defect army. I don't think we're in a position where young officers or senior officers are unwilling to take risk, but I think we should be very, very careful and expect people that when mistakes happen, look into it, sure. But you might also be looking into it to protect them. Be like, hey, we're gonna look into, we're gonna get the facts. Now these facts show that like, hey, you know what? We need to be able to explain the decision process that was made.
Now you're a general now and you've had a tremendous career. When you have an obstacle put in front of you, what's the best experience, whether you were young, first lieutenant or a major or a colonel? You know, what are some of your go-to leadership styles for General Shane Reeves?
I call my wife. I'm like, hey, what do I do? Like,
yeah.
Can you fix this for me? I like to do this a lot. If it works, I like to take credit. If it doesn't, I like to blame others. No, wait a minute, no, that's not true. That's bad leadership. No, just kidding.
Yeah.
You know what? So I think you have to surround yourself with talent, like the most talented people. I don't even care what their jobs are. Like Rich Gash is sitting over here. He's the Vice Dean for Resources. I see Jen Notaro saying, there's a lot of Dave Dominic right there. These are talented human beings. I don't even care what their job is. You just get them around you, and then you can solve any problem. I'm not going to solve it on my own. Like Shane Reeves is going to fail, guaranteed. I need help, and I need help from really talented people. And so when you ask me what my go-to is, I'm very, very particular about who I hire and who works around me, and I'm very, that particular component of me can make me somewhat difficult, but I think it's really about like, do we have the same vision? Are we all focused on the mission? Are we all willing to work together to solve these problems? It's my favorite part of the Army. My favorite part of the Army is the people. And it doesn't really matter if they're military, civilian, it doesn't matter. It's like, I really enjoy the people because they're almost always focused on those Army values like loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, personal courage. Words that sometimes are cliches to some, but not to them. And I think that when I put a team together like that, and I'm lucky enough to be part of it, and they're focused on those type of intangible values, we can solve anything. Like I have this great story. I was in Israel, and I was sitting there, and there was this is pre October 7th, and there was two older gentlemen, and they'd been negotiators, and one had been a negotiator for the Israelis, one had been a negotiator for the Palestinians, and they were old enough now that they could talk about their experiences, and they were talking, and as they were doing that, I was sitting there thinking, I could just tell me the problem. I can solve this. Let me start writing this down. I'm like, wait a minute, this is like a 2,000-year conflict. Such an American thing to do, right? But I think that you can really do amazing things if you just do a few things. I think you got to be optimistic, and I also think that you have to truthfully, you have to keep your foot on the gas pedal, because our normal state is to just be like, I'll do it tomorrow. It's like, no, we're doing it right now. We're doing it right this second, and we're going to do it together.
It's, I was going to go into the Israeli who brought the conflict up earlier on. And Otto von Bismarck, I think, had a philosophy that said, the generation that gets thrashed gives birth to the generation that's going to give the thrashing. Yeah. And, I was talking about this yesterday. My father and I went to a dinner across the river, a bunch of developers, and we were talking about what's going on in the Middle East. And I said, I'm concerned of watching those children on TV and the two sides of the conflict. The UN is coming out saying there's atrocities being, on both sides of the aisle, and I don't know what the future is of that, but I worry about my kids. I worry about my sailors and Marines that work for me now, the soldiers and airmen I get assigned to work with, about having to pay retribution for some of the things that we're involved in. And I believe in what we're doing as a country. I believe in the mission. I told President Biden a year and a half ago that I said the American General GI has, I believe, saved Ukraine. And when I was over there after the activation, the American average enlisted person did the work that I think most of the Europeans, I don't know if we're capable of doing it at the time. So I'm proud of what we do and what we've done, but I am very concerned, like you said, about the future and how that ends. I don't know. That's what everybody's asking. Like, how does this story end?
I mean, if you're talking about the story in Gaza, I think it's going to end with Hamas being militarily decapitated. I don't see Israel stopping. I don't see any chance of them stopping. And truthfully, if it's in my own personal opinion, not in my official capacity, I don't see why they would, based on what happened on October 7th. It just doesn't. And that, that's. You also have to know that is the only Jewish state in the world, right? They have a lot of scar tissue, and I think that. So I think in Gaza, like they're in Rafah right now, I don't think the military operations will end until they think that they feel safe, and I would expect that they will continue to chase down the architects of October 7th till the ends of the earth. Yeah. And I think that will not stop. I think that will continue until it's done. But that's not the real problem, because they can win the war and they can win the battle and lose the war. And I really think you have to take a step back and think through, like, why did Hamas do that? And I had this great conversation with General McMaster, who was the national security advisor under President Trump. And he said, well, I think they did. I think Hamas did it because they just wanted to kill Jews. I said, but would you also agree that this is really advantageous for the Iranians, who are trying to undercut the Abraham Accords, which is the normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia and the Arab states? And he's like, absolutely. And I think that my concern is the same as yours. I think that the violence is not declining. I think it's going to continue. And again, I hate to use the term a great unraveling, but there's this time from after World War II, and many will say up until maybe deep after 9/11, that there was a thing called Pax Americana, right? We created the UN Charter. Like, we did it. Like, the victors in World War II met in San Francisco in 1945 and wrote the UN Charter with a preamble that said, to avoid the scourge of war that we have lived through 2 times in our life, we are putting in together this framework. And that framework seems to be not working. And I think we've moved into a multipolar world where we're returning to some of our historic problems, which is nationalism and global alliances that aren't really focused on peace, but maybe focused on aggression.
You mentioned Kissinger, and about a week or two before he died, he actually did a BBC interview. And one of the things that he was saying is, back in the day, they used to be able to have diplomats that they could call Mubarak in Egypt and say, I need you to reduce the temperature in the region, and we'll reduce it in this area of conflict. And it seems like there's a lack of being able to call these people to reduce the temperature, and I think that's what we're all talking about. We're worried about this unraveling, and I don't know if it's because we have a lack of those friends and diplomats to be able to make all those connections happen.
I think that is actually one of the strengths in the United States, and particularly the United States military, not just Army. But if you look at West Point, for example, we have a number of international officers that go through the all 4 years, right? Or if you look at other military schools, you'll see foreign officers at those schools. Well, they become friends,
yeah.
And those friendships continue well beyond, and that does happen more than you would expect. Where, hey, my classmate is now one of the top guys in Cameroon. Hey, is there by chance we can talk? And so I do think at the military level, it's quite interesting. I don't know I don't know at the State Department, or yeah. I don't know in that regard, but I think relationships matter almost more than anything, right? If you can call your friend and be like, hey, can we turn this down a bit? That usually will work.
Yeah.
And so I'm a big believer that we should be communicating more, not less. And sometimes, again, we will say we're severing ties because this nation did this. Well, I'm like, yeah, well, I am a bit Kissinger-esque here, where I'm a bit more of a realist and saying, yes, they're not going to be exactly what we would want them to do, but we should be talking because that's the way we have to operate.
We're going to do some Q&A in a little bit, but I wanted to talk to you just to get some of your leadership. Like, what do you do? What do you read? What do you enjoy doing? Do you physically have to work out every day? But like, I run before I do things like this, or before I have a debate or a budget presentation. What does Shane Reeves do behind the scenes?
So I read a lot. I read the Wall Street Journal, New York Times every day. Maybe not all of it, but I read a lot of it, and that just helps me to stay aware. I'm a bit old school. I actually like the papers. They're really hard to find. They're like $10 to buy both of them, but I do it if I can do it. and then I also am reading a couple of other things every day. I always read a couple of chapters in my Bible, and I always have a book I'm reading. And so, like right now, this book is fascinating. I mean, this thing is awesome. I'm reading a book by William Manchester called American Caesar, which is about MacArthur. That thing has been unbelievable. Just an amazing story. And then I work out. I try to work out every day because it's like a way to release tension, and it helps me think as I'm doing whatever. And so that's pretty much those are like the things I do on a regular, other than spend time with my family and hang out with my family and feel sad and nostalgic as I see them grow up.
It's funny. It's one of my favorite people that I love in history, American history, is Eisenhower. And lately, I just got reassigned to a unit out near his home, and I was able to visit his home recently. And it was kind of not really open for visitors, but they let me in there and showed me so many people that came and visited him at his home, like including like the Russian leadership, the Soviet leadership back in the day. Your top 4 or 5 must-to books for young leaders here.
All right,
so you got young airmen, you got young. I'm looking at the audience. You got some Marines.
This is gonna be hard because I love so many books. There's a great book and I'm a victim of recency. Right? I've read something really recent, or I have a friend who wrote something and I wrote a blurb on the back, and I'm like, this thing's awesome. There's a book by Michelle Parody called The Light of Battle, and it's about Eisenhower from just Operation Torch, which is North Africa, to Operation Overlord. And the takeaway from that book is you're never in charge. That's the takeaway. Like Eisenhower's not in charge. There's always somebody. He's always like, oh, I gotta talk to the Pentagon. I gotta talk to Marshall or whatever. I'd go with this book by William Manchester called American Caesar. I love Andrew Roberts. He's a historian, writes single volumes. Probably my favorite book ever was Napoleon by Andrew Roberts. I love the book Churchill by Andrew Roberts, fantastic. I love fantasy. Of course, everyone's read these, but I love The Lord of the Rings. I've always loved those books. And then I think that if you're thinking about some shorter things, I think an oldie but a goodie is Platoon Leader. Was written a Vietnam platoon leader wrote it and just talks about some of the hard things to do to be a platoon leader and to lead others. And then if you can pick up Black's Law Dictionary, I'm just kidding. Don't ever read that. Don't read that. But those are probably on my list right now.
Okay.
John Keegan, Face a Battle. That's a great book.
Okay.
That's a great one.
I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to work with my staff and your staff to make sure I list them underneath there because they sound fascinating.
Oh,
so
yeah.
We'll link them underneath this when we release
that'd be
it. So with that, I think we're going to go to Q&A.
Sure.
So we have a mic, so just raise your hand if you're ready to ask a question. Oh, boy.
All right.
You got first one's coming from a lawyer and then an engineer. And then the cyber command, the first commander of cyber command for NYPD.
Here we go.
I'm getting you braced up.
All right. I didn't stretch out. I should have hydrated, taken some ibuprofen.
There's a water to your right if you need it.
Okay. Yes, sir.
You spoke about leadership and incentivizing innovation. What are some concrete examples that you can give in order for leaders to do that?
You got to give them the resources. You can't tell people to do something and not resource them, and then you have to be willing to underwrite it. I mean, those are the two that come to my mind right away. So if I ask someone to say, I need you, we're in the middle of something that's been very hard, which is a reorganization of West Point. So West Point is going through a big physical transformation. I talked about the one building, but really West Point's going through something a little bit more special. Over the next 10 to 15 years, about $5 billion is being put into West Point, renovating the entire institution. And that sounds awesome. But that's usually also an indication that the country is subconsciously saying we need to get ready for something. This happened right before World War I. This happened right before World War II. This happened during the Cold War at West Point. But then as part of that physical transformation, we've also taken on a reorganization of the academic program for the first time since 1989 to make sure that we are preparing our graduates to be able to successfully again, navigate all of that uncertainty and all that ambiguity that is taking place. So brought in the academic board, which is the historic body at West Point that's existed since 1823 that thinks through these issues. And I'll tell you what, it is really hard. It was really, really hard to force these changes. And I thought the three things I had to do is I had to be personally active, involved. There's a number of deans I know or know their stories and have learned from them. And one of the pieces of advice I got was if you're going to do something hard, you got to lead from the front. You got to be sitting in the room and make sure that they know you're serious. But I also had to resource and say, listen, if we're going to make changes and you say I need this, this, and this, I got it. That's on me. And then if the reorganization fails, that's on me. And so I think you have to lead from the front. I think you got to resource it, and I think you need to be willing to take responsibility and hold yourself accountable.
Okay.
There.
Oh, hold on, we got to get the mic so we got so our listeners and viewers can hear this.
Thank you. General, with respect to China,
Yeah.
what do you see as our greatest short-term and then our greatest long-term challenge or vulnerability?
So I think the greatest short-term is again the singular focus on China and Taiwan, and recognizing that we have some serious issues, right? And those issues would be we have to go expeditionary. Now they have to do for China to take Taiwan, they have to do an amphibious landing, and that's the most difficult military operation. Though, again, I learned from my book on MacArthur, he did 85 of them in a row successfully in the Pacific, which is amazing. But China has not done one, ever. And so to go to Taiwan, they have to do that. But we have to, if we're going to support Taiwan, and there's a real question, would we support Taiwan? That's a question I think that we have to answer that question. I think we would be really foolish not to for different reasons than many think, because if Taiwan goes, then we're no longer the power in the Pacific, and I think there's a whole recalibration, and certain things start to happen, such as, is the dollar the reserve currency any longer? Because China then will control trade in the Pacific. Those are bigger, different questions. But I think that I think that when China says they're going to Taiwan, and they're going very soon, I think we should listen to them. I think that's a real threat. And we'd have to get thousands of miles across oceans and fight against a nation state that has a demographic advantage, most likely economic parity, internal lines of communication, internal lines of logistics. That's going to be really, really difficult. That's the short term. The long term is actually a little bit different. You know, China has a lot of internal problems too. They have their own demographic issues, big demographic issues, because of their one-child policy. And there are indications that China could be, by 2100, probably 60% smaller than it is now. There is an incredible concentration of power and wealth in China, and that usually doesn't bode well. And so I think long-term is actually the instability of China, which would promulgate military action quicker. Right? I think China has some serious fundamental issues internally. If you track, for example, China, the way they spurred so much of their growth over the last 20 years was infrastructure building. Just build. Well, that is all coming due. There's no one living in these buildings. There's a property bubble. They have extreme local debt. And in doing that, they put themselves into a position where the leadership has a social contract. Basically, it's like, we'll take care of you and get you into the middle class as long as you know, we need to do what we're going to do. Now, when I say all that, though, never underestimate autocratic states, right? I mean, this is so foreign to what we would think of when we talk about, say, a demographic problem. But is it too far to think the Chinese think they can't social engineer their way out of a population problem? I don't think they have the sanctity for human life that Americans do. I don't think they care about it, and I think that we're in very different places when it comes to human rights, individual liberties, protection of the person, all of those things. And so I think that the short term is Taiwan, the long term is China's internal problems, and I think the real long term is that our value sets are so different that it's difficult to see how we can resolve these issues. It's not a very optimistic view, I know. I do think there is hope, though, and I think I'd go back to communication, and I have great faith in people, and I think that the Chinese people are not probably the problem. I think it's their government.
Fantastic presentation, General, and I'm listening to your first two sentences, and what's exciting is you talked about the cyber center at West Point.
Sorry, this is a cyber guy. I got it.
Absolutely. I've loved going to ACI for a long time.
Sure.
Former NYPD as a first responder to Ground Zero 23 Septembers ago. I always think now we're in this September the 10th world, where You spoke about, that gentleman talked about China, he talked about Taiwan, you talked about moving, you talked about supply chain, you talked about AI. When I see a county executive of one of the 3,143 counties in America sitting about 4 feet away from a general, I think about, from West Point, the Army, I think about what are your thoughts about what happened on Friday when a cybersecurity company, CrowdStrike, goes down and 8.5 million devices worldwide go down, and they needed 8.5 million reboots to get these devices back up. In New York City, we created Cyber Command. We tabletopped a lot with West Point, and we felt that we needed New York City Cyber Command to be the umbrella of our 120 agencies because something special happened on Friday. After CrowdStrike went down at 0900 hours, City Hall, and no city is perfect, but City Hall and folks at Cyber Command got in front of 8.5 million New Yorkers, let them know, what we don't know, and what we're doing about it. So I see this here right now, sitting on the same stage. How do we get all other 3,142 counties to do this? And how is West Point teaching their cadets that the infrastructure that supports Cornwall, Highland Fall, West Point, that critical infrastructure outside that gate, like the water, like telephones, like hospitals that went down on Friday as well, how are we teaching them to mitigate that? Because that's how China, I believe, humbly, they're going to come at us asymmetrically like that. CONUS. Sorry for that long question.
No, it's a great question. You know, the CrowdStrike failure on Friday is analogous in my mind to maybe, again, I'm not casting aspersions here, but maybe how there were some lessons learned about how we responded to COVID, right? And what I think you see is a troublesome state that maybe wants to affect us starts to look and say, well, that was really impressively effective, and it wasn't a cyber attack, it was just an IT failure, right? And that IT failure had dramatic effect. I think the same thing you would say with like a biological agent, right? And not to scare you, but I think a biological agent has been indicated to be quite effective, right? And so, I think that what you're getting at is there has to be close collaboration, there has to be communication, and not just in terms of various forms of the parts of the government. Really, in cyber, it's really got to be between the private industry and the government, right? Private industry in cyber is immensely frustrated by the lack of response by the government, oftentimes, and the government on the opposite is like, hey, corporations, you can't go off and act independently because it's going to be attributed to the state. And so figuring out ways to work through all this. But I think your world and cyber in particular is there's always a conflict going on, right? There is no binary, there is and there is not a conflict. I mean, there's a spectrum and it's always ongoing, and the cyberspace is potentially for us, it's the second newest domain of warfare, and we put great emphasis on the newest as being space. But cyber, I mean, 15 years ago, cadets couldn't branch cyber. There was no cyber branch. Now 5% of West Pointers are becoming cyber officers. We didn't have we didn't have an Army Cyber Institute that was a think tank. So the Army was like, we recognize we need to do this. And now it's trying to figure out how we get the Department of the Army, the DoD, to work with our other partners at the state and the local, the state, and the federal levels, and working with private industry so that the response can be very quick, because critical infrastructure will be one of the biggest threats, I think, and cyber can affect those things very quickly. Yes, sir.
We have one over there. Yep.
Thank you for the service, sir.
Thank you.
Two-part question. One, there's been many reports about how our military branches are having trouble recruiting enlisted service members. So the first part is West Point seeing that at all? Is there a parallel to that at all? And then secondly, while there's some discussion about some of the branches of service having to lower their standards in order to get recruits, you alluded to the physical nature of the future soldiers. Has West Point done anything or had to do anything to lower their standards, or are they maintaining their standards for the soldiers of this generation?
Yeah, so the answer to both those is no, right now, for West Point. West Point has not had a noticeable decline in applicants or qualified candidates. It fluctuates, but it hasn't had like a precipitous decline. It hasn't had a huge jump. It's been pretty steady. And there hasn't been any type of reduction in physical standards. I think that the gap is big, so there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that that young people can meet the physical standards. But there hasn't really been at West Point a decline in either applicants or the physical standards that are required to graduate. In terms of just recruiting broadly, It's really a difficult question about why, right? What is going on? Is there a declining propensity to serve? There's about 80% of young people are initially aren't qualified to serve in any of the military branches because of either obesity or obesity-related illnesses, a drug offense, or can't pass a drug test, a felony conviction of some kind, or a criminal conviction of some kind, or they don't have the requisite education, right? And so, but I sometimes wonder, do we need as a military to also think about how we are assessing people and move to where society is at? I don't know that answer right now. And then there's also the question of like, what exactly do we want in our Army? Do we need 500,000 infantry officers or infantrymen? We need them, but maybe not all 500,000. I mean, I need pilots. I need people that can do cyber. I need people to do lots of different things. So what is it? Do we need to be monolithic in how we approach people? So I don't know. These are all questions that are being asked right now. But undoubtedly, there has been a decline in recruiting in the services. I also would tell you, though, I mean, talent has options, right? And so there has to be evangelists for service, right? I mean, if someone asks me, like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing with myself. What should I do? I'd be like, join the Army, join the Navy, you don't have to do it forever. Do it for a number of years. You're going to learn some life skills. You're going to get money for education. You're going to learn to stand on your own. I mean, a lot of amazing things are going to come out of that experience. And I don't know how much of that messaging is taking place. I don't know. The thing I don't know, and I'd love to compare it to, is there also a decline in recruiting and say for police officers? Is there a decline for firefighting? I don't know the answer to that. Is there just a big decline in the propensity to serve generally? There is a lot of indications about we don't come together as much as a society, right? There's this great book called Bowling Alone about people just don't get together, right? And you think about it, you see a decline in bowling leagues. Basically the thesis of the book is that bowling is more popular now than ever, but bowling leagues have reduced. People don't get together. People don't. You see some of the old, some of the civic clubs. There's a big decline in those. You see a decline in church attendance, whatever it might be, and you're like, what's causing that? And that means there may be a declining propensity just to serve others. And I think that is something that's important for us to emphasize, that there's something bigger than yourself always, and that can come. And there's a lot of great things that come by serving others. This is the question I've been waiting. This is going to be a good one. Let's see it.
Good evening, sir. My name's Audrey Whitfield. I'm a cadet at West Point.
All right.
Give her a round of applause. That's great. That's great. She what year are you?
I'm going to be a yearling.
She has been waiting all year to I got the dean on a hot seat. Oh my gosh. This is stressful now. I'm sweating.
My question is, with the current shortfall of enlistment in the Army and our all-volunteer force, there's been talk about reinstituting the draft. Mm-hmm. What's your opinion on this? And then if it were to be reinstituted, what's your opinion on women being drafted?
That's a great question. And I'm glad that you're going to be, my time in the Army is almost up. You can solve that problem. You've got it. So the draft went away in 1973. So we just celebrated our 50 years of an all-voluntary force. And I think most indicators and the data will support this, is that we're a better force when we're all voluntary. There's real challenges when you're drafting people, because what you're doing is you're forcing them to do things that maybe they don't want to do, right? And then also how the draft was implemented, and those who served and those who didn't. And it was really broken down by some really difficult lines, mostly on socioeconomic and others. So I am not a fan of the draft, is my point. I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think that our Army is anywhere near needing to do that. But if there was an existential threat against the country, I would not preclude that from happening. To the second part of your question, do I think women should be drafted? Yes. If men are going to be drafted, women are going to be drafted. And I wouldn't really even equivocate on that. So.
Hi,
Sorry.
sir. My
Hey.
name's Teresa. So my question is, I'm in the military, I'm in the Air Force, and as you probably know, we do more with less. Less money every year, less people,
Yeah.
less equipment, and definitely less time. What are some of the ways that you found motivation for your troops, or your coworkers have found motivation for your troops, that kept them going, thinking positively?
Yeah, that's such a great question, because eventually you can only beat your head against the wall, right, for so long. I actually think the job has to be fun. I mean, it just has to be fun. And so if for example, if soldiers or airmen or whoever are doing a bunch of things, and you look at it and you're like, why are we doing that? Like, someone has to have the courage to be like, that's stupid, let's not do that, and let's not do that. And there's got to be an easier way to do that, right? There's got to be an easier way to create efficiencies. Like, I don't know, we could use technology. Like, that might be a way to do things. So I think that there has to be a relentless effort to gain efficiency, but that's not going to solve the big problem, right? I think we need to invest more in our military, but that probably isn't surprising because of who I am and my biases, right? But I do think that right now, where we sit in comparison to how much we spend on defense compared to GDP is pretty low, and so as a nation, we have to determine what we can and can't do, and you resource what you care about, and that's okay. Like, if we don't want to resource a military that can potentially do a number of different things, then we won't. But I think that being said, I think the military has to look at itself also and sit there and think, like, I mean, am I really as efficient as I could be? Am I really? We have to be introspective about making sure we're doing our very best every day to be good stewards of the American taxpayers' dollar. So I say all that. That's not going to solve the problem. I think that you have to be able to lean on each other. I think you have to have some compassion. I think you have to understand where people are coming from. And I think sometimes that means it's like, you know what? Yeah, you don't need to come to go coach your kid's baseball team. Go do that, please. It's going to make you a better person, right? Versus sitting here and filling out the whatever the Office Space slide was, right? So I think it's a little bit of that, but what your point is so well taken, which is expectations have gone up. I wouldn't limit it to just the military. I think to all public servants, right? I mean, I think, and I'm speaking out of my lane here, but when I think about a police officer isn't just law enforcement anymore. There's like a social worker component, a psychologist component. There's a lot of people turning to you to solve their problems. I'm like, I don't know if you can do it all. Like, I don't know where the line is drawn exactly, but we can't do it all. Sir.
General, peace through strength, or coalition government, coalition forces? Which one would work better as we move forward?
Oh, it's got to be both. I mean, I'm all about peace through strength, right? That's I love of course the Teddy Roosevelt quote, right? Carry a big stick, but we aren't going to fight by ourselves. I mean, coalitions and partners and working with partners is really the key. The first UN military force was in Korea in 1950, and it had 12 countries participating. By the Persian Gulf, I mean, it was, I can't remember the exact number, but it was 50s and 60s. And I think that does a number of things. It helps, obviously, offload, work, but it also starts to demonstrate, there's a consensus that what we're fighting towards is really important. So my answer to you is both. I think that it's easier to build something and maintain it than tear it down and rebuild it. So I like peace through strength a lot, and I think that's something we should really consider. But I also think that we're going to want to rely on others from across the world to help us when the time comes.
It's not for you, it's for the viewers.
So listening to you now, I'm thinking in the next administration, if they called you to work for them, would you?
the next administration, if I got called to work, I mean, I want to be, you ready for this? Here's what my dream is. I really want to be a high school football coach. Okay, listen, I don't think I'm going to be a very good one. I'm not going to be. How do I know that? Because I've coached many youth sports and we never won anything. All right? So I took a team to Cooperstown, right? There was 104 teams. We got mercy ruled in the consolation games. 104 out of 104. My nephew's there right now and they're in the top. I mean, I'm like, I mean, would I work in an administration? You know what? You know what? I love my job. I'm too focused on what we're doing right now, and I have no intention of leaving West Point because I can't think of a better place to work. I mean, I really can't think of a better place where you get to like cadets. I tell anyone this. When you start to get down about the United States, I'm like, okay. And you all are very fortunate. I'm like, come to West Point, just hang out with some cadets for a few hours, and you're gonna be like, we're gonna be okay. Like we are gonna be all right, right? I mean, it's like Superman when he loses power and has to get by the sun. Like when I start to get down, I just go out and I'm like, let me find it. Bring me a cadet. Bring a cadet over here. Say something to me. Say something. All right, good. Power, right? I mean, I just love what we're doing at West Point. I do think that what we're doing is more important than ever. I think that these young officers are going to have immense challenges, but I'm immensely not just proud of them, but I have extreme confidence and faith in their ability to navigate it. And I actually think the United States is on the ascent, and I really mean that. I don't think it's in the decline. And you hear this a lot, but we say this all the time. Like Americans are always been saying we're on the decline. We're not. And I mean, you can look at it economically. You can look at it. I mean, look at we have questions about immigration. It must be a great place. So many people want to come here, right? I mean, this is an amazing country, and it's just got so many opportunities that I can't imagine doing anything else than what I'm doing right now. But thank you. And trust me, they wouldn't want me anyways. I'm from Wyoming. I can't carry that state.
Sir, any last thoughts?
I mean, thank you all. I thank you for being here. I know it's at night, so and I really appreciate the chance to talk. This was a huge honor, and I'm very, very thankful. I'm sure many of you come to West Point. If you do, please come. It's your academy, right? It's the United States Military Academy. I'd ask you to come and see it. I know many people will come for football games. Come on a random day. Just walk around. And I think you'll see something really, really special about what makes America so exceptional. And I think it's our military academy and our military, but also just realize that all those cadets, they just come from every walk of life across the United States. Those are just the population of this country. And that's a pretty amazing thing. So again, thank you for giving me the chance to talk tonight.
Thank you. Brigadier General Shane Reeves. General, thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And by the way, September, we are going to be having the superintendent of West Point coming, and we have an all-star lineup of some really good leaders. So stay tuned, or we'll get them out as soon as we have them scheduled.